Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into a candlelit scriptorium. Just you, a jittery cartographer with ink-stained fingers, and the faint, nervous hum of quills scratching parchment. The windows are fogged from breath and boiled ink. There's a peculiar smell in the air, something between damp wool and overcooked goose feathers. A lumpy cat named Oswin glares at you from the corner like you've personally offended it by existing. You're here for one reason: to witness the quiet, trembling hesitation of a man who's about to draw something he probably shouldn't. His hand hovers above the map, quill shaking. The coastline is done. The compass rose is pristine. But there's still that horrible empty patch of sea in the corner. And you already know what's meant to go there. A dragon, of course. But it's Tuesday. And this man is not a fool. You probably won't survive this, but don't worry. Neither did most medieval apprentices. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you listening from? And what time is it there? I read every one of those. By the way, now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You lean closer. The mapmaker sighs, and his shoulders slouch beneath the weight of what's clearly not just a drawing. He dips the quill again, careful not to blotch. You can see it. The scales, the curve of the tail, the jagged maw that's probably never been anatomically accurate but always emotionally terrifying. The room goes quiet. Maybe just a squid, he mumbles. A harmless land squid. You try not to laugh. It's already a long night. This scriptorium doesn't have heating, but it does have an alarming amount of rules posted on the wall in bad Latin. Things like no dragons after midday and beware Tuesday ink. These are not jokes. In this guild, there's a genuine belief that map-making on Tuesdays can summon misfortune if the creature drawn is too mythologically weighted. That's a direct quote from a former guildmaster who reportedly once sneezed while drawing a griffin and then couldn't taste anything for 3 years. But back to this poor map-maker. His name is Gerard. He once tried drawing a dragon on a Thursday and had a boil on his shoulder that spelled repent by Sunday. The memory haunts him. Tonight, he wants to finish early and get some cider at the tavern. But he's also been tasked with mapping the coastline of a kingdom no one's actually seen. You know, normal medieval delegation. Draw me a harbor, add mountains, put 2 boats, and just stick a dragon in the corner in case it's cursed. Gerard whispers, "What if I draw a small one?" You consider it a polite dragon, something you could maybe chat with at a candlelit supper. But the issue, of course, is that in medieval mapping tradition, the size of the dragon often implies the size of the threat, or at least how much funding the patron gave for map decoration. Bigger dragon, higher pay. Also, bigger consequences if your city ends up under its wingtip by accident. Historians still argue whether this was symbolic or just lazy outsourcing of cartographic guilt. Gerard sighs again and sets the quill down. I'll sketch the rocks first. That's always the compromise, isn't it? Sketch the rocks. Pretend you'll get to the dragon later. Maybe the rocks are the dragon. Maybe that's how it starts. You glance at the ink pot. The black is almost gone, which is fine, because black is considered too final for Tuesday illustrations. He should be using green specifically, Tuesday green, which was made from a mix of iron salts, moss, and probably some weasel droppings. That brings us to an actual fact. In 13th century England, certain mapping inks were reserved by day and purpose. Reds were reserved for feast days, golds for royal commissions, and green. Green was thought to be the safest pigment for mythical beasts, unless it was Tuesday. Now, no one quite agrees why Tuesday is the cursed day. Some say it stems from Mars, the god of war, because in Latin-based calendars, Tuesday is Dies Martis, or Mars's day, a bad omen for harmony. Some claimed, others blame an obscure French tale involving a monk, a snoring basilisk, and a spilled soup bowl that scalded 5 cartographers during a Tuesday scriptorium explosion. Fringe theory. Yes, but oddly specific. So here you are, in a cold room, watching a man draw seagulls because he's afraid to draw a beast that might doom his marriage or his ankles. There's also the matter of deadlines. Most map makers were paid by surface area, not accuracy. And if a corner of the map was unexplored or too dangerous, you simply filled it with monsters and called it a day. It's efficient, it's decorative, and it tells invading armies. Maybe skip this part. Gerard finally relents. I'll pencil the outline, he mutters. A pencil. In this context, that's a bit of charcoal that crumbles with every curve. You watch him make the arch of a wing. Not too large, not too sharp. Just ominous enough to say, there be dragons, without actually committing to a beast that will get him fined by the guild's nocturnal superstition committee. Yes, that's a real thing. Their sigil is a goose with a sword. The candle flickers. Oswin hisses at the wall. You exhale quietly. It's going to be a very long Tuesday. Tuesdays, you learn quickly, are not a good day for ambition. Not here. Not now. Not if your profession involves drawing things that technically shouldn't exist, using ink made from tree bark and paranoia. Gerard wipes his brow with a sleeve that is, frankly, more ink than cloth by this point. It's the day of Mars, he murmurs again. Not really to you, but to the general dampness in the air. Too much war in the air on a Tuesday. The lines wobble. He's not wrong. Even his compass trembles a bit today. Though that might be because the table is wedged on an uneven stone and balanced with a scrap of boiled linen. It smells vaguely like regret and old soup. You lean closer to inspect his progress. The dragon outline is there now, faint, charcoal, tentative. It curls toward the coast, like it's second-guessing its own decision to exist. Maybe it is. And here's where things get very medieval. Tuesdays were often considered the worst day to begin a journey. Farmers avoided planting. Marriages were rescheduled. In Constantinople, some merchants closed shop altogether on Tuesdays, citing increased fire risks and general doom energy. A phrase you're pretty sure was once etched into a church lintel after a suspicious lightning strike. One fringe belief even claimed that drawing a monster on a Tuesday could summon it into waking dreams, particularly for those who hadn't tithed properly or had impure thoughts about fishmongers. Specific. But these were highly imaginative times. Gerard adds 3 rocky spires next to the creature's elbow. To distract it, he says, you nod. Naturally, dragons are easily confused by inconvenient geology. Behind you, another apprentice sneezes. Someone groans. You hear the dull clink of a dropped inkstone and a brief, whispered prayer to Saint Isidore of Seville, patron of mapmakers. Among other odd vocations like school teachers and those who deal with wasps, Gerard sets down the charcoal again. Let's just say it's a kraken instead. You both glance at the guild calendar. Tuesday, full moon. 2 eclipses this month. One of them was visible in Ireland, which probably counts double. Not ideal. Historians still argue whether medieval aversion to Tuesdays was religious, astrological, or just workplace inertia dressed up in theology. One theory suggests that the Fourth Council of the Lateran banned unholy mappings on Tuesdays in 1215, but that may have just been a monk misreading a footnote about dietary abstinence and spiraling into cartographic fear. Another theory comes from the Iberian Peninsula, where old folklore warned that Tuesday-born children would wrestle spirits with poor results, which is also a fair description of every group project you've ever done. Back in the scriptorium, Gerard now has a new concern. The dragon's tail is inching dangerously close to the nearby kingdom of Swelwich, which is known, if at all, for its parsnip exports, and that one noble who burst into flames during a coronation portress. He mutters, if I curl the tail left, it looks like it's attacking the coast. If I curl it right, it sits on Swelwich and insults their navy. You suggest making the tail loop upward, like a polite question mark. Gerard nods solemnly and adds 3 careful curves. He then draws a puff of smoke by the mouth and immediately regrets it. Now it's breathing. I shouldn't have done that. It's going to follow me into my dreams. You hand him a cinnamon biscuit and tell him to breathe. Another cartographer in the corner speaks up. My cousin drew a basilisk on a Tuesday and was bit by a real goose that same week. Coincidence? I think not. This sort of logic is impossible to refute in medieval times, especially when accompanied by the authoritative thump of a pewter mug. You glance at the wall and notice a diagram labeled Tuesday Avoidance Protocols. It reads, do not ink wings larger than a swallow's. No visible teeth. No glowing eyes. Even in jest. Absolutely no fire. Unless post-watershed or Friday adjacent. You wonder if mapmakers created these rules to avoid lawsuits or just to pass responsibility onto paper. Here be dragons was more than flair. It was plausible deniability. If someone vanished while exploring, the map warned them. If something burned, it was already labeled. If a prince got eaten, well, maybe don't build a castle next to Mount Slightly Smoky. Gerard begins stippling the ocean with little dots to suggest depth. He does this for exactly 4 minutes before whispering, "I've named him Mervyn, the dragon." You blink. Mervyn, the tentative. You approve. Mervyn doesn't look like he wants to destroy anything. He just looks like he was summoned by mistake and now has to live in a corner near Swellwich, with nothing but a few rocky spires and a pile of oysters. You whisper, "Add a tiny boat fleeing in the distance." Gerard grins. Now you're both complicit. The tension lifts slightly. Maybe it's the biscuit. Maybe it's the absurdity. Maybe it's that every other cartographer in this room is quietly doing the same thing, making sense of nonsense with ink, scale, and a shared fear of Tuesdays. One of them chuckles, holds up his own map, and says, "I made mine a lizard with opinions, not a dragon." Technically legal. There's a rule for that too, somewhere, probably written on the back of a soup receipt and nailed to a cathedral door. Gerard leans back. "I'll outline him in green tomorrow." You nod. No one outlines on Tuesdays, especially not Mervyn. Gerard doesn't come in the next morning. You're not worried yet. He's done this before. Tuesdays take their toll. But you suspect, deep down, that Mervyn might have gotten into his head. Instead, you find yourself seated next to a new figure, Master Theobald, head of parchment logistics and unofficial guild whisperer. He wears a tunic the color of overcooked oatmeal and smells faintly of goose ink. His eyebrows form a single, majestic arc of suspicion. "I heard you encouraged a dragon sketch," he says flatly. You pretend to examine a nearby spool of twine. Theobald sighs and taps the edge of a rolled-up map with a knuckle that probably once lost a duel to a candlestick. "Come," he says. "I'll show you the margins." You follow him down a narrow corridor, lined with failed experiments maps where rivers turned into worms, or towns vanished under splotchy ink washes. These are the margins of madness, and you've heard whispers about them for weeks. These, he says, are what happen when you don't respect the empty spaces. He unfurls a map on a table. At first glance, it's lovely. Rolling hills, tasteful calligraphy, a compass rose that looks like it's studied abroad. But then you see it one corner filled with frantic loops, twisted scribbles, and what appears to be a goose wearing a crown. "That's a mistake," he mutters. "Started with an innocent kraken, ended with the Bishop of Romley seeing double for 6 months." You nod slowly. "Was it drawn on a Tuesday?" Theobald narrows his eyes. "It was started on a Monday, finished exactly 3 minutes past midnight." There's a long silence, and that's when you realize the margins are where mapmakers pushed their luck. If they ran out of known coastlines or funding or patience, they just drew something. A beast, a face, a circle with ominous lashes. The margins weren't just blank space, they were a test of character. Historians still argue whether the most dangerous maps were the ones that left margins empty or the ones that filled every inch with decorative certainty. Theobald leans close. The more certain you pretend to be, the more the map lies. We decorate lies to make them feel polite. You're not sure if he's still talking about maps. You nod anyway. Back at your desk, you unroll Gerard's half-finished parchment. Mervyn looks lonely. The boat you added still flees the scene with admirable urgency. But now your eye catches something else. One of the spires Gerard drew looks off. It's leaning, barely perceptible, but it's a lean that suggests motion, not erosion. You blink. The rock has moved, probably just the ink drying. Probably. Behind you, a younger apprentice is sobbing quietly into a goatskin. She's just been assigned to redraw the eastern coastline of Ghent, a region notorious for 3 things: untraceable winds, unreliable ferry schedules, and an old sea chanty about a lobster uprising. To cheer her up, you tell her about Mervyn. She nods solemnly. "I once drew a salamander in an estuary and my brother broke his toe on a turnip the next day." Cause and effect are very loosely defined in this place. You sit back and stare at the margins on your own draft map. There's an area near the bottom left technically unexplored, but too visible to ignore. You consider drawing a shoal, maybe a whirlpool, or a few politely spaced sea cucumbers. Instead, you press your quill to the parchment and write, "Here, be, maybe something." We're still debating it. Bold, vague, honest. Theobald would approve. You keep working, filling in roads and hills and an oddly specific grove of linden trees requested by a baron with hay allergies, but your eyes keep drifting to the margins. The truth is, most medieval maps weren't meant for travel. They were symbolic, theological, and full of what modern scholars politely call decorative uncertainty. Jerusalem sat at the center of the world. Paradise was often tucked in a corner with suspiciously ripe fruit. And dragons. Dragons were punctuation marks. They ended places, not here's how to get there, but this is where thinking stops. Still, you feel something shift as you look at Mervyn again. There's a strange comfort in drawing the unknown, maybe even a bit of control. The cartographers knew they couldn't map everything, but by naming it, by inking it, they could pretend they weren't afraid. Pretend they knew what lay past the last lighthouse. You press your palm to the page, as if to calm it. Mervyn deserves a better home. You add a mountain, a soft-looking one. Theobald passes behind you, peers over your shoulder, and says, You brace yourself. Then, softly, he looks like he naps in the sun. You smile. He walks away. You keep sketching. The margins don't feel quite so dangerous now, just unfinished. The problem with dragons, you soon learn, isn't where they start, it's where they end. Specifically, where their tails land. You stare at the bottom edge of Gerard's half-finished map. Mervyn's elegant curve has turned into a dilemma of angles and implications. His tail swishes dangerously close to the northern coastline of Swellwich. And although you could argue that it's merely decorative, decorative tails have sunk empires. A year ago, one map showed a dragon tail looping too close to the Duke of Trenvaughn's summer estate. The Duke thought it was a threat. He mobilized a battalion, accidentally burned 2 villages, and declared war on a family of fishermen who later turned out to be his cousins. All over a squiggle. Historians still debate if that map was a political cartoon or just bad calligraphy. You pick up the quill and hover. The margin space is tight. Mervyn's tail can't swoop out dramatically, not without slapping a monastery. Nor can it coil inward without suggesting internal digestive distress. You sigh. Across the room, an older cartographer named Isabel groans audibly. She's been working on the Great Western shipping route for months, and just realized that a dragon's wing overlaps with a proposed trade harbor. It looks like it's sneezing on the docks. She hisses, "I'll be excommunicated." To your left, someone mutters, "Only if the bishop's in port." You and Isabel exchange tired glances. The rulebook clearly states, all limbs of mythical creatures must be proportionate to threat level and considerate of local economies. You bend closer to your map, whispering, "Where does your tail go?" Mervyn. You try curling it into a swirl too hypnotic, a zigzag too aggressive. A simple downward flick suggests bowel trouble. Eventually, you land on a loose spiral tucked against a peninsula. Nobody lives on. Safe. Quiet. Unlikely to offend anyone but a very sensitive goat. You exhale. And then you hear it. Cartographer Gerard's commission deadline was yesterday, intones Theobald from behind a sheaf of crumbling sea charts. Your pulse stumbles. Shall I assume you're now inheriting the project? You nod before your brain can interfere. Excellent. Then you'll also inherit the rest of the territory east of Swellwich, including the volcano. The volcano. You check the map. That blank oval, you'd assumed it was a decorative stain. Active. You ask hopefully, emotionally. At best, Theobald mutters, fine. You'll map a volcano, and you'll do it with the dragon's tail politely swerving away from nearby villages and ecclesiastical outposts. You're nothing if not considerate. As you begin sketching, you recall an odd superstition. Drawing a beast's tail too close to sacred architecture is said to cause monastic misfortune. No one knows what that means exactly, but one abbey did flood for 6 months after a manticore's nostril grazed their cloisters. Coincidence? Probably. Still, better safe than soaked. So you steer the tail clear of all holy sites, known soup vendors, and the village of Granley, which once declared itself dragon-neutral and printed a pamphlet. The tail now curves delicately into a bay shaped like a sideways nose. You add shading, cross-hatching. A ripple of sea foam. It looks elegant and a little sad. You lean back, Mervyn is done. But here's the thing, dragons are never really done. They echo. One appearance spawns questions. Where does it sleep? What does it eat? Why is it always looking left? You flip through older maps for guidance. One dragon curls itself around a mountain range with a facial expression best described as deeply unamused. Another lounges across an island chain, like it fell asleep mid-stretch. A third is just a foot, no body, no explanation. Just a lonely, clawed foot labeled beware. No one has ever clarified whether that meant beware or be aware, like be cautious pottery. Scholars still argue. You look back at Mervyn and, on impulse, add a single sheep nearby. Not for danger, for companionship. And then you add second, and a faint path through the hills that leads nowhere in particular. You don't know why. It just feels right. Because dragons aren't just threats. They're metaphors, emotional punctuation, cartographic flair, and occasionally company for an otherwise blank corner of the map. Across the room, Isabel mutters, I made mine smile. Is that illegal? You shake your head. Not today, not on a Wednesday. Theobald reappears, inspecting your work with the solemnity of a man judging turnip sculptures. You've solved the tale, he says. Barely. Solving barely is still solving, he replies. That, apparently, is high praise. You roll the map carefully, brush away a few biscuit crumbs, and add your initials in the lower margin. Not too large, not too bold, just enough to say, I was here. Because someday, someone else will unroll this parchment and wonder why the dragon looks like it's listening to something distant, why the volcano resembles a scone, why the sheep seems so unconcerned. They'll never know about the Tuesday it was sketched, or the tale that nearly started a war. The ink pigments arrive late. They're packed in satchels that smell faintly of old nettles and roasted onion, which means they've been sitting too long in the courier's cart. You open one pouch marked verdigris, caution. Mood affects hue and immediately regret it. It smells like vinegar and bad decisions. Still, today is pigment day, and that means you finally get to color Mervyn. Carefully, cautiously, and absolutely not in red. Red is reserved for divine flames, royal cloaks, and on more than one occasion a regrettable incident involving a bishop's birthday banner. No one wants that again. You test the pigments first on a scrap of parchment. Burnt umber dependable, lapis blue expensive and probably fake, and green. Ah yes, Tuesday green. You remember the rule? Never apply Tuesday green on a Tuesday. It stains unpredictably and smells faintly like fish sauce. You check the calendar. It's Wednesday. Just barely. The ink is fair game. Pigments in the medieval world are a gamble. They're made from minerals, plants, sometimes crushed bugs, and occasionally things no one should be inhaling. Some monks went blind making yellows. Others developed parchment lung, which sounds made up, but was very real if you lived near a moldy archive. You gently mix the green with ox skull and whisper a small apology to Mervyn for the smell. He accepts. You can tell. You begin painting the ridge of his back. Careful not to press too hard on the parchment. The pigment glides. He looks less angry now, maybe even bashful. His eye twitches into something that could pass for a wink. You didn't mean to do that, but it feels right. Across the hall, Isabel is coloring her sneezing dragon. She's opted for dusty mauve and says it's symbolic of allergies. No one argues. Meanwhile, apprentice Tomlin attempts to grind cochineal beetles into a reddish pink for his kraken. The powder flies everywhere, and now the air tastes like candied shrimp. He sneezes violently into someone's border illustration of St. Eustace. There is shouting. You stay focused, because color is everything. In medieval maps, color wasn't just about realism. It was theological, hierarchical, and frequently psychological. Blue for divine waters, gold for God's presence, green for earthly matters, purple for royalty or sea monsters with dramatic flair, black for roads or doom, depending on whether the mapmaker had had lunch. You once saw a map where every dragon was the same saffron yellow. Scholars argued whether that meant they were part of the same family or just painted by someone with a surplus of turmeric and no imagination. Today, Mervyn gets layers, green first, then a hint of gray along the spine, a soft brown on the tail's underside. His wings, yes, are seafoam blue. You pause. You didn't plan that, but it fits. Do dragons fly? Someone asks from the corner. No one answers. Historians still argue whether dragons were ever intended to be literal on maps, or if they were a warning, a placeholder, or simply there to fill awkward gaps. Some dragons had wings, others didn't. A few had human faces, one had a lute. That map was quietly buried during Lent. You sketch faint clouds near Mervin's wings. Not that he's airborne. He might think about flying one day, maybe after therapy. Behind you, Theobald appears with a new assignment. We need a leviathan near the Arctic wastes, and a gentle one this time. No more serpents with 6 eyebrows. You nod and point to Mervin. This one's friendly. Theobald eyes him. He has an approachable tail. That's rare. That's practically a guild compliment. The room quiets as everyone works. And for a moment, all you hear is the gentle scrape of quills and the occasional sigh from someone realizing they've accidentally painted a monastery pink. Again, you finish Mervin's eye. Then, for no reason at all, you add a tiny hat, a soft, cone-shaped one, just resting behind one horn. Not visible unless someone really looks. You lean back. Mervin is done. And he is magnificent. But your task isn't over yet. There's the matter of the sea. You begin dotting it with stippled waves. Each line a small argument with yourself. Should the tide go northward? Did someone already draw a current here? What do cartographic fish even do all day? You dot carefully around Mervin's tail, not wanting to distract from the elegant curl. Then, you add a boat. Then a second, both heading in the opposite direction of the dragon. You label one hopeful merchant, the other just passing through. Theobald walks by again. Still. Tuesday. You check the sun. Nope. Thursday. Then why does the room still smell like regret? You point at Tomlin. He's still sneezing beetle dust. You finish the sea, sign your name discreetly behind a small wave, and fold the map corner to seal the pigment. It's done. But the question hangs in the air like damp vellum. What happens when someone actually uses this map? You find out what happens when someone actually uses the map almost immediately and entirely against your will. It starts with a messenger. He's out of breath, sweating through 3 layers of wool and clutching a crumpled copy of your dragon-laden coastline like it personally insulted his lineage. The queen is not amused. He gasps. You blink. Not exactly the feedback you were hoping for. She says the tail of the creature he gestures at poor. Spiral-tailed Mervin insinuates a threat to the western duchy of Fenbrook, and that it is emotionally unacceptable for a monster to appear so smug on royal parchment. You take the map gently and unfurl it across the nearest table. You've looked at this coastline a dozen times. Mervin is curled respectfully in international waters. His tail is nowhere near Fenbrook. At most, it gestures vaguely in the duchy's direction like it's thinking about sending a birthday card. Nothing more. She wants it removed. The messenger huffs, or at least made less opinionated. Opinionated. You touch the edge of Mervin's tiny cone hat. You suppose that might be construed as sass? Isabel leans in over your shoulder. You could give him a remorseful eyebrow arch. She offers helpfully. Works on mine. Looks like he's sorry for existing. You consider it. The queen, after all, has a history with maps. Last year, she ordered the complete redrawing of the southern marches after discovering a decorative sea lion too close to her cousin's estate. The artist responsible was reassigned to nun banners, which mostly involved drawing vines and politely distressed angels. He hasn't smiled since. Still, you'd rather not erase Mervin, so you offer a compromise. You dip your quill in diluted ash ink and add a puff of sea mist curling over part of Mervin's tail, just enough to obscure the full curl, just enough for plausible ambiguity. Now he looks bashful. You say, now he looks blurry. Isabel mutters. But maybe that's better. You re-roll the map and hand it back to the messenger with a firm nod. Tell Her Majesty the creature has been recontextualized. He looks baffled but grateful. It's clear he wasn't trained for cartographic diplomacy, and that's when you realize something important. Maps carry emotion, not just territory and scale, but moods, suggestions, insinuations. A well-placed dragon can mean danger, yes, but it can also mean mystery, a warning, or a joke only other mapmakers will understand. Which brings us to the Great Fish Incident of Lothwin. A map from 20 years ago featured a massive fish labeled definitely harmless, possibly delicious. No one thought anything of it until an explorer used the map to plan a sea route and ended up marooned on an island populated by aggressive otters and a priesthood that worshipped shoes. Historians still argue whether the fish was ever real, or just a metaphor for how far you could get lost if you trusted optimism over experience. You once saw the map? The fish is smiling. It knows what it did. Back in the present, you clean your brushes and prepare to finish a second draft. Not because the first was wrong, but because every map deserves a double check, especially if it involves sea monsters, royal tempers, and border ambiguity. And you've just been handed a new problem. The blank section east of the volcano. Theobald leans in, grumbling. Needs something. Not a beast this time. Maybe a strange fog or a misleading tree. You raise an eyebrow. A misleading tree. He shrugs. We had one last year. Looked like a landmark. Turned out to be a bird nest the size of a chapel. Scared a bishop. You nod. That tracks. So you begin. A small copse of trees. Then a winding road that fades into fog. Then, because you can't help yourself, a shadowy suggestion of something behind the trees. Just a tail. Barely visible. Maybe Mervyn has a cousin. You don't label it. Let future cartographers argue about that one. Meanwhile, Isabel is sketching a sea serpent with back problems, saying she wants to normalize aquatic posture diversity. No one objects. One apprentice adds a tiny cane beside it. Another draws a boat delivering ergonomic chairs to confuse dolphins. This is how maps evolve. By accident, by joke, by necessity, and sometimes by sheer exhaustion. Later that evening, you sit back, stretching your shoulders. The scriptorium is quieter now. Fewer quills, more yawns. You pass by Tomlin, who's asleep on a sheaf of coastal diagrams, snoring softly into a fjord. You glance once more at Mervyn. He's still there, still smug, still perfect. And now, technically royal approved. You smile. Then, just for fun, you add one more detail to the map. A small placard near the base of the volcano, partially hidden behind a boulder. You write, if lost, follow the sheep. The sheep become a problem. Not immediately, not loudly, but over time. It begins when an envoy from the kingdom of Lowmoor arrives, holding your map at arm's length like it might start baying. He clears his throat. Her Grace would like to know why there are sheep this far south. You blink. Because they're cute. He does not laugh, apparently. Placing sheep near disputed territory implies grazing rights, and the Queen of Lowmoor is not amused by the idea of cross-border wool claims. Never mind that the sheep on your map are barely bigger than a comma and clearly just emotional support animals for Mervyn. Sheep are suggestive, he adds solemnly, as though you've included an open letter of war. You resist the urge to point out that the same map contains an unlabeled fogtail, a volcano shaped like a pastry, and a dragon wearing a hat. But no, the sheep are the issue. You promise to review the agricultural implications. Theobald, when informed, groans into his cup of nettle tea. Add a fence, he says. You do? A tiny, faintly sketched wooden fence surrounding the two sheep. You even add a small shepherd's hut for flavor. The sheep now look gently supervised. That seems to satisfy the guild. For now, but this opens the floodgates. Because once you add a hut, someone must own the hut. And once someone owns the hut, you must account for taxes, roads, and the vague possibility that this shepherd might demand representation in future maps. Isabel notices your distress and leans over. Just say it's a metaphor. You blink. For what? For knowing your place. She grins. Or wool. Either works. That's the thing about medieval maps. They weren't designed for navigation the way we think of maps today. They were spiritual, symbolic, and often more story than science. The Mappa Mundi, for instance, had Eden at the top, monstrous races on the sides, and only some cities in the right place. That didn't make it wrong, it just made it useful in a different way. Historians still argue whether the real purpose of these maps was theological instruction, royal propaganda, or just a fancy way to impress people with gold leaf and moderately accurate elephants. You add a third sheep just outside the fence, a rebel. Immediately, you regret it. Theobald peers over your shoulder. Now it's a migration. You scribble it out and replace it with a sleeping deer, much less political. Back at your desk, you receive word that Gerard has returned. He looks pale, a bit shaken, and smells faintly of citrus and regret. I tried drawing a wyvern, he whispers. On a Tuesday, I don't want to talk about it. You nod. Understandable. He looks at your map and tilts his head. You gave Mervyn offense. It was legally necessary. He shrugs. Fair. Gerard gets back to work on his own piece. A decorative border for a map of the northern steppes. It includes gooseberries, a sad-looking sun, and what may be a passive-aggressive otter. You admire his restraint, and then the real surprise comes. A royal courier appears. She's young, armored in ribbons and protocol, and holding a scroll sealed with the Queen's wax stamp. Everyone falls silent. Even Tomlin stops chewing his brush. She unfurls the scroll and reads, Her Majesty acknowledges the revised dragon. She is content. The sheep are forgiven. There is a collective exhale. However, the courier adds, the crown requests a special map, one with fewer monsters and more triumph. You blink. Triumph. She nods. Less fog. More banners. Emphasize borders. Soften volcanoes. Eliminate anything moody. Her Majesty wants clarity. Clarity. That's code for boring. You accept the commission, but as soon as the courier leaves, you roll your eyes. Isabel leans over. Do you want me to help? Only if you can make a banner look like it's sighing. She grins. That evening, as the light fades and the scriptorium turns golden with the last sunbeams, you begin working on the triumphant version. You draw rivers that flow politely, mountains that look like well-behaved muffins, no dragons, no fog, no sheep, just borders. It's technically excellent, but it has no soul. When you finish, you tuck it under the official guild ribbon and set it aside. Then, without saying anything, you unroll Mervyn's map one more time. You look at his curved tail, his bashful eye, the sheep, the fence, the mist, and you whisper, we'll keep this one just for us. There's a knock at the back door, not the main scriptorium entrance, the back door. The one that smells like smoked parchment and occasionally hosts a toad. You open it and find a man dressed in thick wool, his hands stained with river clay. He doesn't speak right away, just holds out a leather scroll tube. You the one who did the sheep? He finally says. You hesitate. This feels like a trap. Depends who's asking. He unscrews the lid and gently unrolls a weather-beaten map. Your map. Mervyn stares back at you with his sleepy little eye. The sheep are there, still fenced, still looking mildly unbothered. I run the ferry from Fenbrook to South Hollow. The man explains. This map saved my cargo. You raise an eyebrow. Because of the sheep. No, he says. Because of the dragon. Oh. You lean closer. He points to the corner where Mervyn curls, just above the sea lanes. See, I was going to dock at Coral Bend, but the dragon tail. It made me hesitate, so I went around. Turned out Coral Bend was flooded that night. Flash tide. Took 3 other boats. He nods at Mervyn. That beast. He warned me. You stare. You did not see that coming. Historians still argue whether medieval map symbols were meant to influence behavior or merely reflect legend. But in moments like this, you begin to wonder, what if they did both? You thank him. He nods again and leaves, whistling softly as he disappears into the fog. You roll the map back up, more carefully this time. Later that day, the guild assigns you a new apprentice. She's small, sharp-eyed, and already muttering about celestial alignments. You ask her name. Beatrice. She says, dipping a quill straight into ochre without hesitation. I like griffins. They're emotionally tidy. You respect that. She asks to see your old maps, and you hand her one with a misaligned compass, rose, and a fish that looks like it's been emotionally betrayed. She studies it, then points at a smudge. What's this? Someone spilled plum ink. You say, no. She says, that's a beak. She's right. The smudge has a shape now, a profile. The implication of feathers. Your mind starts spinning. What else have you missed? You dig through scrolls, pulling out maps dismissed as failures too messy. Too embellished, too bold. But with Beatrice's help, you begin to see patterns. A bend in the river that mirrors a hawk's wing. A grove that spirals like a seashell, unnatural, deliberate. You start marking these moments, one by one. It's possible, just possible, that old mapmakers were trying to say more than geography. Maybe some were embedding messages, warnings, or jokes. One map has a series of dots labeled coal deposits, but they're spaced exactly like a constellation. Beatrice traces it with her quill. Looks like the archer. You blink. Sagittarius. No, she grins. Just a guy with a bow. You keep looking. A coastal line once believed to be eroded ink damage turns out to form the profile of a boar. If you turn the parchment 90 degrees and squint through beeswax, you make a note. Boar Bay. Speculative. Your workspace grows more chaotic, more alive. Tomlin lends you a candle with a built-in magnifier. Isabel brings you discarded gold leaf fragments. Even Theobald contributes a broken compass and a sardonic eyebrow of approval. One night, as candles burn low, you unroll your original Mervyn map again. Beatrice looks over it with fresh eyes. He's guarding something, she says suddenly. You stare. What? Look at the tail curve. And the spires. It's a gate. A shape. She's not wrong. You hadn't planned it, but now that she says it, you see it. The coastline, the mountains, the fog, they form a subtle ring, and Mervyn curls at its edge like a sleepy sentinel. You don't know what it means, but it feels like something. You sit back, suddenly aware that what you created jokingly, cautiously, under protest is no longer just decoration. It's a layered message, maybe even a map inside the map. A whisper. You stare at Mervyn. He winks. Again. You're not entirely sure that's pigment anymore, but you don't care, because now you understand something the older mapmakers must have known. Dragons don't just guard the edge of the world, they guard meaning. And if you're careful and clever, and maybe a little reckless, you can write messages into the margins. On purpose, you whisper to Beatrice, "We're going to need more sheep." You need more sheep. But not just any sheep. They must be carefully placed, strategically implied, cartographically meaningful, symbolic flock distribution. Beatrice calls it. You prefer to think of them as emotional punctuation, quiet witnesses to the madness of dragons, politics, and parchment. You start by revisiting Mervyn's territory. You don't want to crowd him, he's a solitary type, obviously, but you add one sheep perched slightly higher on a cliff, gazing contemplatively at the sea. It balances the composition, adds gravitas. Then another, hidden in the negative space of a mountain's shadow. That one feels secretive, possibly involved in quiet espionage. Beatrice leans over. Give it a monocle. You do, and then it's official. You're no longer mapping geography, you're mapping subtext. And it turns out, you are not alone. Isabel shows you a discarded chart of the eastern archipelagos, where the islands form the outline of a sleeping bear if viewed upside down. Accidental, she says, then smirks, or divine inspiration. Hard to tell. Tomlin finds a trade route map where the trade winds form a spiral. A perfect echo of the ancient symbol for mercy, or possibly cheese. Depending on the dialect. Scholars still argue. You and Beatrice start tagging these findings. You call them quiet glyphs. Visual murmurs from one mapmaker to another. The guild doesn't officially recognize this category, but Theobald grunts in a way that suggests approval wrapped in plausible deniability. It's exhilarating, and just a bit dangerous, because if there are hidden messages in maps left by hands that knew the cost of saying things aloud, then what are you saying now? You look at your latest draft, the one the Queen will never see, the one with Mervyn, the gate, the sheep, the one that doesn't mark borders so much as bend them, because that's what dragons do, right? They curve the rules. They protect the things we're not allowed to name. You remember something Theobald said once? Maps are not about land. They're about control. And if that's true, then a map full of sheep and beasts and whimsical fences. That's a kind of rebellion. You keep drawing. A spiral trail in a forest that loops back into itself. A pond shaped like an eye. A caravan route that zigzags exactly like an old lullaby's rhythm. Beatrice starts building a legend in the corner. She draws icons with careful flair. A curled tail, a liminal boundary. A sheep, Biso, possible truth. A cup of tea, Iwio, safe rest stop. She adds a new one without asking. A pine cone with legs. You don't ask. She doesn't explain. You respect that. Then inevitably someone notices. A traveling monk named Brother Aldwin visits the guild to commission a pilgrimage map. He's tall, twitchy, and wears sandals even in snow. He spots your scroll unrolled and immediately frowns. This, he says, tapping the dragon's wing, is a theological maybe. You blink. Excuse me. He unrolls more of the parchment. And this spiral. This is the Fibonacci sequence. And that is the glyph for threshold. Hidden in the hills. This is not navigation. This is initiation. You glance at Beatrice, who shrugs and keeps drawing her pine cone. Aldwin looks horrified. Do you understand the implications? You nod slowly. We're doing our best. He reports you to the guild the next morning. There is a formal review. Theobald convenes a special meeting of the Map Ethics Panel, which meets exactly once every 17 years. The room smells like lavender oil and suspicion. You're made to sit at a table covered in old parchment, surrounded by cartographers with eyebrows so long they've merged with their beards. One of them coughs. You've drawn a sheep with intent. You nod. 3. Actually, one has a monocle. A pause. Another murmurs. We feared this day might come. You expect punishment, but instead, they hand you a pen. Draw us another. One whispers. The world has grown too legible. You blink. You want more ambiguity. The eldest cartographer leans in. Clarity is tyranny. That night, you're given access to the deep archive, where maps go when no one agrees what they're saying anymore. You find one with a river shaped like a question mark. One where the ocean whispers if you touch the ink with warmed fingers. One where dragons sleep inside mountains that resemble cradles. And the stars are connected by roads no one has traveled yet. You work all night, and when you finally emerge, you carry a new scroll. Not official, not for sale, not even for explanation. It contains Mervyn and the sheep and a coastline that only exists if you believe in it long enough. You tuck it into a leather case and label it. Not all who wander need directions. Then you hide it behind the radiator, just in case the queen drops by. Thursday nights are usually quiet in the scriptorium. Not tonight. There's a storm chewing on the thatched roof. The candles sputter with the rhythm of the wind. And someone's lute practice in the hall below is making every B-flat sound like a sea monster in emotional distress. You're hunched over a new commission, the eastern peninsula of Gallowmere, and your hand keeps twitching. Not because of fatigue, but because the moment you inked the coastline, your compass started lying. You flick it again. North spins south. South spins sideways. Then it points directly at your inkwell, like it's issuing a dare. Beatrice notices. Did you draw something? Just a tree. She nods. That'll do it. You lean back and scan the map. The tree in question is a forked willow perched on a bluff overlooking the sea. You drew it half asleep, without reference or forethought. But now, it hums. It feels placed. Chosen. You didn't choose it. You whisper, did I just curse a trade route? Beatrice replies, only mildly. Depends on if the tree's judgmental. You glance at it. It's definitely judging. This isn't new. Of course, mapmakers have been blaming compass weirdness on symbolic interference for centuries. There are even notes in the guild's archives describing how too many eyes on a map literal, painted ones can disrupt magnetism, or at least sleep cycles. Historians still argue whether that's folklore or just a byproduct of working near whale oil fumes for too long. You consult Theobald. He squints at your tree, sniffs the page, and says, did you name it? You pause. I thought of Lombert. He flinches. Well, he mutters, there's your problem. Turns out, naming elements on a map that weren't in the brief opens the door to what the guild refers to as narrative drift. That's when a map stops depicting reality and starts generating its own plot. Loambert the Willow, now acknowledged, might begin influencing nearby geography. Slightly longer winters, extra fog, birds nesting out of sequence. One time, a named oak accidentally founded a cult. You consider trimming Lombert down to a shrub, but Beatrice grabs your wrist. No, he's earned his place. She adds a small walking path leading up to the tree. Just a curve. A gentle suggestion. The compass settles. For now, you continue drafting. The sea surrounding Gallowmere is notoriously fickle. You mark the sandbars, the safe inlets, and after a moment of hesitation, a small cluster of jagged rocks that, when viewed from a certain angle, resemble an open mouth. You label it the chattering teeth. Immediately, the air in the scriptorium shifts. Isabel looks up. You name rocks now. They look chatty. She nods, as though this is perfectly logical. This is how it starts. One story begets another. Soon, Beatrice is adding a small coin icon beneath Lombert's roots. That's where the traveler drops an offering. She says, for safe passage. But there's no shrine. There is now. You exhale. Theobald walks by, eyes your map, and mutters, congratulations, you're building lore. You try to argue. It's just a tree. It's never just a tree. He points to a rolled scroll high on the shelf, the Crimson Isles, a map banned 2 decades ago for accidentally inspiring a rebellion when someone mistook a decorative serpent for a route to divine revelation. The serpent, as it turned out, was just part of the border filigree. Still, lives were changed. Songs were written. A pie was named after it. Maps matter, especially the accidental ones. You keep sketching. You add a lantern hanging from Lombert's lowest branch. The path now winds slightly, just enough to suggest it avoids something unseen. You add a footbridge, a rabbit, a second lantern. Beatrice draws a mist bank shaped vaguely like a whale. You say nothing, and then you both stop. Because the quills have begun humming. It's faint, but real. Ink vibrates at the edges. The parchment breathes a little. The compass points not north but home. Whatever home means to you. This isn't cartography anymore. This is storytelling. The room holds its breath. Tomlin, still awake for once, stares at his map of the northern coast and whispers, I think I drew a ghost. No one questions him, because we all do. Eventually, that night, as you finish inking the final shoreline, you realize something important. You're not drawing the world as it is. You're drawing it as it feels. And feelings are contagious. Maps spread, not just through trade routes or sailors' pockets, but through imagination. Through the whispered belief that maybe, just maybe, there's something meaningful in the curl of a dragon's tail, in the placement of a tree, in the angle of a sheep's monocle. You sign your name gently at the bottom of the scroll, and you whisper to Lombard, thank you. The compass finally stills. The meltdown begins, as most map-related meltdowns do, with a goat, specifically a winged goat, painted delicately into the corner of a new Mappa Mundi commission by a visiting artist from the southern provinces. Bold, enthusiastic, and tragically unfamiliar with guild protocol, the goat has curls and hooves shaped like soft questions, and wings far too feathery for comfort. You're sipping broth and attempting to re-ink Lombard's lantern when the shouting starts. Who authorized a celestial ungulate on a sacred map? That's Theobald, full volume. From across the hall, the artist shrugs. It's metaphorical. Metaphorical for what? For blessings, airborne dairy, imminent ascension. There's a clatter as Isabel drops a tin of gold leaf in disbelief. You lean into Beatrice. What's the record for guild-wide collapse? She checks her notes. 14 minutes after someone drew a weeping sun over a cathedral and labeled it weather uncertain. This new goat might beat that, because the Mappa Mundi isn't just any map. It's the big one. The symbolic masterwork hung in royal halls and cathedral vestibules. It's meant to display the world as it should be. Tidy, moral, doctrinally sanitized. No dragons, no jokes, no ambiguity. Certainly no goats with altitude. The goat, by the way, is looking skyward with gentle ambition. It's actually kind of inspiring. Theobald is now pacing. It's not that it's a bad goat, he mutters. It's just not doctrinally endorsed. Beatrice, ever unhelpful, suggests adding a halo. The artist obliges. Now the goat is glowing. A full-blown cartographic crisis is underway. You watch as the other mapmakers gather, forming small clusters of outrage, intrigue, and confused admiration. Someone proposes redacting the goat with a decorative cloud. Another counters. But then the cloud looks complicit. Someone else whispers, maybe it's a prophecy. You rub your temples. Has anyone asked what the goat's name is? The artist brightens. Yes, his name is Elliot. Of course it is. Soon, the debate escalates to the official heraldic symbol committee. which meets roughly as often as comets pass. They're ruling. If Elliot is to remain, he must be supported by scriptural allegory, 3 monastic footnotes, and at least 1 naturalistic justification. This leads to a flurry of theological whispering, scholarly shrugging, and finally, a compromise. Elliot stays, but is now officially classified as a heavenly ruminant of the eastern breezes, which, while meaningless, sounds dignified enough for royal ears. You breathe a sigh of relief, disaster averted. Barely. Back at your desk, you glance at Mervyn, still curled, still calm, still wingless. Thank goodness. But now the thought lingers. What if he had wings? You try sketching them. Just light flourishes, tracings in the air above his back. It doesn't work. He's too grounded, too settled. Mervyn isn't about flight. He's about guarding the unknown, so you erase them, but not before you feel a flicker of envy. Because Elliot, the high-altitude goat, just soared through protocol, carried by whimsy and poor planning, and part of you wants that freedom. Later that evening, a junior scribe brings you a scroll stamped High Commission. Urgent. You open it. It's a request from the Queen's astrologer. Require visual representation of the stars surrounding the coast of Alden. Include constellations real and possibly symbolic. Leave room for commentary, and perhaps a fish. You reread it twice. Finally, a commission that welcomes maybes. You unroll fresh parchment and begin. Beatrice sketches a constellation shaped like a broom. You add one that resembles a spoon. The sky fills quickly with glimmering symbols, some ancient, some invented, some that look like they've been watching too long. You draw a cluster of stars near Loambert and connect them in the shape of a bell. Why a bell? Asks Isabel. You shrug. Felt right. Historians still argue whether celestial maps were ever meant to be literal or just hopeful projections. A few believe that every medieval star chart contains at least one invented constellation hidden, playful, or secret. You hide a sheep among the stars. The monocle sparkles faintly in silver ink. Later that night, you overhear Tomlin practicing his introduction for the next guild review. If asked, he says, "We did not draw the goat. We revealed him." And in a way, he's not wrong. Because maps are revelations, not just of land, but of imagination, of personality, of who we were when we made them. You unroll the latest star chart, and Mervyn gazes up at the heavens now, his eyes faintly reflecting Elliot's ridiculous, holy assent. You smile. Just once, you whisper, "Don't get ideas." The compass spins again. This time, it's not just yours. Every compass in the scriptorium on desks, shelves, even the cracked one Theobald keeps in his coat begins to turn slowly, then jerk sideways, then stop altogether, all of them pointing toward one thing, the archive wall. It's an ordinary shelf, dusty, filled with forgotten scrolls and half-maps wrapped in vellum scraps. Most haven't been touched since someone misspelled cathedral as cathedral and quietly retired in embarrassment. You and Beatrice exchange a look. Isabel mutters, "Well, that's not ideal." Theobald appears, holding his compass at arm's length, like it might bite. He grunts. "It's back." You raise an eyebrow. "What's it?" "The dragon claws." He says. You blink. "That's not a metaphor." "No," Beatrice whispers. "It's a real clause. Buried in contracts. Old guild stuff." Theobald points to a locked drawer beneath the shelf. He kicks it once, nothing. Twice, dust puffs out. The third kick opens it with the slow groan of neglected secrets. Inside, a scroll wrapped in red twine, sealed with wax bearing a dragon curled around a quill. He breaks the seal, unrolls it, and reads aloud, "No cartographer shall, knowingly or unknowingly, place a mythical beast dragon, wyvern, serpent, or otherwise on any official parchment on the eve of the spring equinox, unless said beast is fully detailed, properly shaded, and emotionally consistent." You blink. "That's real." Isabel leans in. "And we're 3 days from the spring equinox." Beatrice flips through her notes. Mervyn is detailed. Theobald sighs. But is he emotionally consistent? The room goes quiet. Because that's the question, isn't it? What mood does Mervyn project? Curiosity, melancholy, quiet judgment. If he's meant to be a warning, he can't look wistful. If he's meant to be a guardian, He can't look bored. The guild's beast integrity panel, yes. It exists, once rejected a map because the dragon appeared to be considering a second career. It led to weeks of rewrites and an awkward seminar on facial expression theory. You study Mervyn again. He's there, tucked in the lower corner, tail curved thoughtfully, wingless, hat still in place. His eye tilts toward the coast. His expression isn't threatening. It's complicated, like he knows something you don't. You sigh. We have to give him a backstory. Beatrice claps. Finally, you drafted in soft ink, off to the side of the map, a margin legend. Mervyn, once watcher of the Western Gate, now sleeps beside the Edge Bay Cliffs, known for quiet loyalties, dusk rituals, and an affinity for sheep. Approach not in arrogance, but in song. Tomlin peeks over your shoulder. Add that he enjoys cloud watching. You do. It helps. The compass wobbles, then points true north again. Beatrice adds a small musical note icon near Mervyn's resting place. You hum a tune without realizing it. It sounds like old stone and soft wind. The clause, apparently, has been satisfied. Theobald nods solemnly. He's earned his place. You tuck the red twine scroll back into its drawer. But something nags at you. Why was this clause ever written? No one answers at first. Then Theobald says, because someone once drew a dragon, that wasn't theirs to draw. You frown. He continues, a long time ago, a cartographer tried to chart a kingdom that hadn't yet been founded, drew a great winged beast as its guardian, named it, colored it in gold, set it atop a city that didn't exist. What happened? You ask. They built the city. Oh, and the dragon came. Beatrice perks up. Like, literally. Theobald doesn't answer. He just walks away. You sit in silence. Because maybe it doesn't matter whether that story is true. Maybe what matters is that it was believed. That somewhere, someone thought a drawing held enough power to shape the future. You look at your current map. Mervyn is still serene. Absolutely, undeniably present. You add a faint line beneath his feet, a suggestion of old stone. Worn steps, a ritual circle of moss. Just a hint. No explanation. A whisper for someone else to wonder about. Beatrice starts drafting a second map. One that overlays yours with constellations and old ley lines. It's not for navigation. It's for those who read maps like stories, who follow not paths, but possibilities. You help. The two of you work into the night. When the candles burn low and the ink dries at last, you fold the map with care. On the back, in tiny letters, you write, this dragon is consistent. The compass agrees. You didn't mean to create a cult. Honestly, it starts with a single note, folded carefully, slipped under your ink blotter, written in an elegant but slightly frantic hand. I have seen the dragon in the cliffs. It matches your map. Please advise. You assume it's a joke. Probably Isabel, possibly Beatrice. Definitely not Theobald. His handwriting is more stab than script. But the next day, there's another. The sheep appear on the hill, monocled, precisely as drawn. And then another. Low Ambert's path is now real. The willow leans. The offering stone hums. You check the return addresses. One's from Fenbrook. Another from a lighthouse village you barely remember sketching. The third is signed only with an inky thumbprint. Beatrice reads over your shoulder. You've gone full myth architect. You try to laugh, but your stomach's doing that quiet sink thing. It does when you realize you might be responsible for something slightly unhinged. Because it's not just letters. A traveler arrives at the guild gates holding your star map. He looks like he's walked through 4 time zones and a moss storm. He kneels, reverently, and presents a pebble, a gift from the edge of Mervyn's Bay, he says. You take the pebble. It's ordinary. Warm from his hand, Beatrice mutters, you should name it. You do. This is Geraldine. You place it beside your inkstand. Theobald strolls by, sees the pebble, and says, oh good. Another relic. And that's when it hits you. This map, the real one. Not the Queen's version, is out in the world, being followed, being used, being believed. It started as whimsy, a sleepy-eyed dragon, a few rebellious sheep, a fence drawn on a dare. But now, it's guiding people, drawing them to places that didn't exist before you imagined them. And what's worse, you can't remember which parts were real to begin with. Beatrice opens a dusty drawer and pulls out a pile of older, discredited maps. One shows a forest shaped like a hand. Another contains a lake that laughs if you dip your fingers in the right spot. These were too imaginative, she says. Now people are asking for copies. You sift through them. The detail is uncanny. Curled ferns, spiral trails, constellations matching your recent chart. One even has a dragon named Minrin. You stare at the lettering. It's not your handwriting. Someone else drew him. Long ago. Historians still argue whether maps can shape memory. If recording a place that doesn't exist somehow nudges the world toward making it real, the guild calls it cartographic convergence. You call it mildly terrifying. You check the compass. It's pointing toward the archive again, specifically toward an old map that no one's dared to open in years. The Hollow Meridian. You unroll it slowly. Inside, a land you've never seen. A coastline shaped like an ear. Mountains named after things you've never heard of. And in the far corner, a dragon. Not Mervin, but close. Wings raised, guarding a spiral gate. There's a date scrawled in the margin. March 21st. Tomorrow, spring equinox. Beatrice whispers, "What if Mervin's not the first?" You close the scroll gently. The room feels smaller now, tighter. That night, you sit alone at your desk, unrolling your latest draft and staring at Mervin in the moonlight. You draw one more line beneath him, a path leading east, toward the edge of the map. You label it to the Hollow. Then you fold the map into a sealed packet, addressed not to the Queen, not to the guild, but to whosoever follows. You place it in the outbound satchel and mark it for quiet delivery. No fanfare, no ribbon, just the whisper of ink still drying. You fall asleep at your desk. You dream of sheep. You wake to singing, not loud, not clear, but low and echoing. As if someone's humming through the stone itself. You sit up slowly. Your map is gone. Beatrice is gone. And someone has set a warm cup of thyme broth beside your hand. The guild is quiet. Too quiet. No quills, no pages rustling, no distant mutterings about goat wings, just that low, resonant hum and the faint scent of moss and old vellum. You find a note scrawled in Beatrice's handwriting. "We're going. The Hollow is waking. Meet us if you trust the path." You stare at the words, then at the door, then at the compass, which now spins steadily, not toward north, but toward east where Mervin's tail once curled like an invitation. You grab your satchel, your best ink knife, and Geraldine the pebble, because you're not staying behind. Outside, the air is different, softer, tense, like a page about to be written on. The path down to the riverbank looks familiar because you drew it. Loamber the willow leans overhead. And yes, the offering stone is real now, polished, waiting. You leave behind a curl of sheep's wool and a pressed violet, just in case. Farther down the path, you hear footsteps. Isabel emerges from the mist, holding a lantern with starlight inside. "You going too?" You nod. She lifts the lantern. "Then, let's finish the map." The journey eastward unfolds like one of your margins. Forests part where they shouldn't. Hills tilt a little too symmetrically. The road curves, not toward logic, but toward meaning. And along the way, you start to see them. Others, travelers. Some carry scraps of parchment. Some hum the melody from your star map. Some wear cloaks embroidered with sheep. One little girl has a wooden carving of Mervin with movable limbs. You don't speak much, but you know you're headed to the same place. The place none of you have seen, but all of you somehow remember. The Hollow. When night falls, you camp beneath the spiral constellations. Beatrice joins you by the fire, her face smudged with ink and delight. "They're not following me," she says softly. "They're following the story. You just gave it a map." You sip your broth. "I didn't mean to. You never do." She hands you her Nufus sketch, a dragon you've never seen, coiled, sleeping beneath a mountain shaped like a closed eye. You whisper, "What's its name?" She smiles. "Ask it." By the third day, the terrain begins to change. You reach the cliffs that mark the eastern gate, a vast, circular ridge etched with ancient lines. They look exactly like the spiral you drew beneath Mervin. You didn't copy them from life. You invented them. Or thought you did. Everyone gathers in silence. At the center of the gate stands a pillar of black stone, and atop it, your map. Not a copy, not an imitation. The original, weathered by wind, corners singed, ink faint but intact. Even the monocled sheep remains. You approach slowly. Geraldine warms in your palm. Then you see it. New ink. Not yours. Beneath Mervin. Someone has added one line. Draw the rest. Your heart stumbles. This is the end of the map. but not the end of the world. You take out your quill, dip it in the ink. Beatrice hands you. It shimmers faintly, like dusk on still water, and you begin. A new coastline, unlabeled, a tree with bells, a ship shaped like a question. Not monsters, not warnings, just possibilities. Others come forward, slowly, reverently. One adds stars. One adds a road that loops like a lullaby. A child adds a rock with a face. No one argues. The pillar accepts every stroke. You step back. The map glows faintly under the moonlight. Mervyn curls in sleep, tail tucked gently beneath his wingless back, as if satisfied. No one speaks, but you all feel it. The map is alive, not in a spooky, blink twice kind of way, alive in the way language is alive, the way lullabies live in the voice, not the notes, the way borders dissolve under wonder. Beatrice exhales. So now what? You smile. Now we draw our way home. You don't remember walking back? Not really. There was a path, certainly, and there were trees that bowed slightly as you passed, and a breeze that tasted like dried ink in memory. But you don't remember your feet touching the ground. Back at the guild, no one asks questions. Theobald raises an eyebrow when he sees your boots caked in silver dust. Took the long route. He grunts. You nod. He nods back. Nothing else needs to be said. You return to your desk. Same corner. Same cat hair on the seat. Same faint scent of goose parchment and toasted nettles. Only now, the compass doesn't spin anymore. It points somewhere deeper than direction. Somewhere stranger than north. It points toward you. You unpack the map, not the copy, not the Queen's ribboned draft. The map, the one that now holds the Eastern Gate, and the sleeping dragon, and the story that loops beyond the edge. You unroll it. Carefully, reverently. There, tucked in the corner where it all began, is Mervyn, still curled, still watching, his tiny hat slightly crook. You smooth the parchment gently and feel the faint pulse of every line you've drawn. The sheep in their pasture, the winding road near Lombert, the mountain that hums if you hum back. Beatrice walks by, drops a pastry on your desk, and murmurs, "You should archive it." You shake your head. "I'm not done." She nods. "Of course you're not." She sits beside you and begins a new scroll. Fresh parchment, a blank horizon. She draws a line, then a curve, then a sea that might also be a sky, depending on your mood. You watch her for a while, then dip your quill. You start a second map. Not to replace the first, never that. This one is for those who stayed behind, for the ones who dream but haven't yet left. A quiet invitation, a whisper folded into vellum. In the margin, you sketch a faint sheep, no monocle, just a small ribbon, peaceful, watching, waiting. Because the truth is, maps aren't about places, not really. They're about possibility. The idea that something more exists if you're foolish enough to chase it. You write one final note under Mervyn's tail, if found. Follow gently. The story isn't finished. And then you close your eyes and let the ink dry in silence. The candles are low now. Your quill rests beside the last scroll, the ink just barely dry. The hum of the scriptorium has faded into something softer, slower like parchment breathing, or the echo of an old lullaby under the floorboards. You stretch, gently, feeling every joint. Remember it belongs to a body again. Outside the tall window, the stars have shifted. They draw no constellations tonight, just drifting silver dots, like grains of thought you haven't written yet. Beatrice is asleep at her desk, head on her arms, a gentle curl in the corner of her mouth. One of her maps glows faintly, like it remembers being dreamed. You place a blanket over her shoulders. She doesn't stir. In the far corner, Theobald snores like someone filing iron, comforting. In a strange way, reliable. You sit once more, breathing in the scent of wax and quiet ink. You let your fingers trace the edge of the map. There's a calm now, not an ending. Just a pause, a soft inhale before the next story begins. And Mervyn, he's still there. He hasn't moved. But somehow, he seems closer. Not watching you, but watching with you. Like he knows sleep is coming, and that dreams are their own kind of journey. So take a deep breath now. Let your body sink. Let your thoughts float past like clouds over Lombert's hill. No dragons tonight. Just a gentle road through the stars, and the quiet promise that your map is always waiting, right where you left it, curled at the edge of wonder.